Nero lives, the Pirate King. The question is, who was the first false Nero? A year after the reported death of Nero, 2 escort warships from the Italian fleet made a chance landing on the Greek island of Kythnos. Kythnos was a popular safe harbour on the main shipping lanes some 60 miles west of Athens. Close to shore, they were greeted by representatives in imperial uniform. They were Roman officers, leading a well-armed force of military deserters, seaborne renegades, ex-slaves and adventurers. Their spokesman came forward and made an incredible announcement. The commanders and crew of the war galleys must prepare to meet and receive instructions from the rightful emperor. Nero lived, and he had extraordinary plans for the warships that had just arrived on his new island base of operations. Army strength. Galba, the main instigator in the uprising against Nero, commanded just 1 complete legion. In this era, a legion included about 5,000 soldiers, supported by an equal number of auxiliaries. This gave Galba direct command of perhaps 10,000 troops. The rebel generals in Gaul were a more formidable force, including several legions with the legacy and reputation of battle experience. By contrast, the Praetorian Guard included just over 5,000 honour guard soldiers stationed in the capital. The military units that Nero had urgently assembled to defend northern Italy included several thousand marines, rapidly retrained and re-equipped from the Ravenna fleet. They were reinforced by expeditionary units, being prepared for a distant campaign near the Caucasus Mountains. As the political situation worsened, these units began to waver in their support for Nero. This made an escape to the east a logical tactic in the struggle to retain control over the empire. But other armies could be used to seize or secure power. 2 years earlier, in AD 66, Nero had appointed a general named Vespasian to suppress a large-scale Jewish revolt in the Roman-controlled territory of Judea. Vespasian had at least 4 battle-ready legions under his authority, comprising units from Syria and the other eastern provinces. With the inclusion of auxiliary regiments, this represented close to 80,000 soldiers. There were a further 2 legions in Egypt, and numerous garrisons were present in Roman-controlled Asia Minor. Furthermore, the multiple legions positioned on the Danube frontier had not joined the uprisings against Nero, and were well connected to the eastern provinces. Therefore, at the time of his apparent death, an unsurpassed military force awaited the emperor in the east. My name is Dr. Raoul McLaughlin. This is the story of the first false Nero, Nero, the Pirate King. In June AD 68, the legions in Gaul and Spain were in open revolt, and the forces gathered to defend northern Italy could no longer be relied upon. The day before his death, on the 9th of June, Nero sent agents down to the Roman port of Ostia to gather a fleet. Harbour masters, sailors, merchants and crews were informed that the emperor would soon be arriving from Rome with the Praetorian Guard. All those who wished to follow the rightful ruler of the Roman Empire could join Nero and his supporters. Those who were not ready to leave now could follow his hastily assembled fleet to Egypt. In the favourable summer season, it was a 2-week voyage to the Egyptian capital, Alexandria. From there, as emperor in exile, Nero could establish a new imperial court to maintain his rule. From Egypt, he could reclaim the empire. The Western armies, who had rebelled, were not just equalled, but exceeded by the Eastern legions. The allied princes, whose kingdoms stood on the eastern frontiers, were still loyal to the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and would join their armies to his cause. And hadn't the mighty Parthian Empire, which ruled ancient Persia, also declared their support and allegiance to Nero as emperor? Sea lanes and commercial networks extended from grain-rich Alexandria to feed the city of Rome. Furthermore, Egypt provided the imperial capital with a third of the tax revenues that funded the entire Roman state. From this strategic location, Nero, the new Emperor of the East, could ultimately reclaim his imperial birthright in the West. Rumours raced through the port town, calling on the bold and adventurous to join Nero in his escape to Alexandria. Suetonius confirms. Nero sent his most trustworthy freedmen to Ostia to get a fleet ready. Then he tried to induce the tribunes and centurions of the Praetorian Guard to accompany him in his escape. Suetonius, Life of Nero. Excited crowds gathered on the decks and dockways for Nero to appear. But the popular young emperor never arrived. He never came with his imperial guard to make their dramatic escape. As nightfall approached, the multitudes waiting on the docks gradually returned to their ordinary routines. Expectant supporters aboard the waiting vessels would have also quietly dispersed. The following day, news came from the Senate. The Praetorian Guard had abandoned their emperor. At the height of the crisis, Nero had fled the imperial palace incognito during the hours of darkness, accompanied by just a few close companions. He had taken refuge in a villa close to Rome and committed suicide in the squalid backroom of some rural estate, cutting his own throat before he could be arrested. It was an ignoble end to the mighty Julio-Claudian dynasty established by the first Emperor Augustus almost a century earlier. There would be no epic contest for empire or great state funeral. The last ruler of the Julio-Claudians was cremated. He was not entombed in the monumental mausoleum of Augustus, where other emperors had been laid to rest. He was simply placed in the old family tomb of the Domiti, his paternal lineage. To many among the Roman populace, the account seemed unbelievable. His death seemed both tragic and incredible to supporters of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Perhaps the charismatic young ruler still lived, and perhaps he would return with his promised army. This belief encouraged certain people who might be misguided, reckless, deceptive, or ambitious to impersonate the fallen emperor. How did a new Nero arise? Nero was probably not unique in appearance, which gave many actors and entertainers scope to emulate his appearance, mannerisms, and performance skills. Suetonius reports, Nero was about the average height. His skin was marked with spots, and he had body odor. His hair was light blonde, his features regular rather than attractive. His eyes were a weak blue, his neck thick, his belly prominent, and his legs very thin. He was utterly shameless in the care of his person and in his dress. He always had his hair arranged in tiers of curls, and during his trip to Greece he let it grow long and hang down behind his shoulders. Suetonius, Nero, passage 51. The first false or pseudo-Nero emerged in Greece and operated in the sea lanes connecting Italy to Syria and Egypt. Nero had visited Greece in AD 66, just 2 years before his death, and his reputation was enhanced when he declared the liberation of the Greeks, freeing their territories from certain taxes that paid direct tribute to Rome. Nero had toured the major cultural centres in Greece, and in the presence of adoring crowds he had competed in popular sports events, singing contests, and acting competitions. This showmanship had gained him great popularity among Greek communities in the eastern Mediterranean. The emperor was awarded numerous honours for his artistic performances, which further boosted his reputation as the ultimate emblem of cultural achievement. Actors and singers who saw these awards and recognition sought to emulate and even outdo his onstage performances. And one particular Nero impersonator was skilled and confident enough to undertake the ultimate acting role. He would convince the multitude and become the actual emperor. Nero, the pirate emperor. The first false emperor arose shortly after the Senate reported the death of Nero in Rome. Rumours of Nero's return in a region of northern Greece called Achaia quickly spread to the numerous Greek communities in the revenue-rich provinces of neighbouring Asia Minor. Tacitus reports. About this time, the territories of Achaia and Asia Minor were alarmed by a false report that Nero was present. Various rumours were current about his death, and there were many who believed, or pretended, that he was still alive. Tacitus, Histories, Book 2, Passage 8. The identity of the impostor is uncertain, but he must have resembled the emperor and was able to convincingly imitate his behaviours. This was a challenging task, since the emperor's main persona in Greece was defined by skilled public performance. Nero played musical instruments with great proficiency and engaged in complex vocal performances. Obviously, the impostor could convincingly replicate these talents. But other factors gave the performer an advantage. The official narrative, as issued by the Senate, was that Nero had fled his palace in Rome to escape from the city with only the most basic clothing for travel. So there was no need for any impostor to appear in all the paraphernalia of imperial wealth. Perhaps the poorly verified reports of suicide had been invented by his enemies. Was the stranger who appeared in northern Greece really Nero? The surviving accounts dismiss this possibility. Tacitus had heard that the fake Nero might have been from Pontus on the north coast of Asia Minor, but there were other reports in circulation. He writes, "In this instance, the pretender was a slave from Pontus, or according to some accounts, a freedman from Italy. He was a skillful harpist and singer. These accomplishments, when added to the facial resemblance to Nero, gave a very deceptive plausibility to the impostor." Tacitus, Histories, Book 2, Passage 8. Some imitation Neros might have used their skills to extort money, but this pretender quickly gathered a militarized following that included soldiers. It seems that troops had deserted from small units assigned to escort duties. They were joined by other soldiers who had been granted transfer orders for unmonitored travel through the inner provinces. Many of these soldiers could have been connected with the Caucasus campaign, the eastern transfer of troops, supplies, and equipment that had suddenly been aborted. The pretender had a plan involving a seaward passage, perhaps to the Syrian capital Antioch, or the Egyptian city port of Alexandria. Both cities had a largely Greek populace who might welcome the new Nero and swell the ranks of his revolutionary force. It seems ludicrous, but perhaps his goal was to be declared emperor in one of the provincial capitals and receive the support of the eastern legions for the march on Rome. Tacitus reports, "The pretender gathered together some deserters, destitute vagabonds, who he persuaded with great promises before he set sail. Due to a storm, he was forced to land on the island of Kythnos, where he found some troops homeward bound on leave from the east. Some he induced to join him, while he ordered all who resisted to be executed." Tacitus, Histories, Book 2. Kythnos was part of the Cyclades group of islands in the central Aegean Sea. It was a relatively small, unimportant landmass with a limited population and few urban centres, but it was strategically significant. The island was about 60 miles east of Athens and controlled shipping lanes between Italy and the eastern Mediterranean. Many seafarers used the island as a safe harbour in adverse weather, and ships wintered there if they sailed too late in the summer sailing season and were caught by the early onset of hazardous conditions. It was therefore a perfect base for pirate-style operations, intended to gain funds and acquire manpower. Tacitus reports, "The pretender robbed merchants and armed all the most able-bodied of their slaves." Tacitus, Histories. The capture of a single vessel would place great resources in the hands of the rebels. Up to a third of the grain that supplied Rome came from Egypt through the Aegean sea lanes. Lucian describes an Alexandrian grain freighter called the Isis that was forced by bad weather to winter in Piraeus, the harbour of Athens. He reports, "The ship was 180 feet long, over 45 feet wide, and from deck to keel the maximum depth of the hold was 44 feet. And then there was the height of the mast, with its huge yard, and what a forestay it took to hold it. And the lofty stern, with its gradual curve and its gilded beak, was balanced at the other end by the long rising sweep of the prow and the figure of the ship's name goddess Isis. And the ship had other ornamental details, including paintings and a scarlet topsail. But I was more impressed by the anchors and the capstans and the windlasses and the stern cabins. The crew was like a small army, and they reported that the ship carried enough grain to feed every person in Attica for a year." Lucian, the ship. Given the stated dimensions, the Isis probably had a cargo capacity greater than 1,000 tons. The New Testament Acts of Paul reveals further details on how officers, guards, and captives might travel the Mediterranean sea lanes between the provinces and Rome. In the case of Paul, the apostle made the voyage in about AD 60. Paul travelled as a prisoner, being sent from Judea to Rome to stand trial before the Emperor Nero as a Roman with citizen rights. Paul made the voyage with other prisoners who were guarded by a centurion and a small outfit of soldiers. They boarded a westward-bound merchant ship in southern Asia Minor with a large grain cargo destined for Rome. According to Acts, there were 276 passengers aboard this grain freighter, and given the cramped onboard conditions, most of these people slept under tented coverings on deck. Although the ship safely reached Crete, a severe storm destroyed the vessel near Malta. This account in Acts indicates how missed schedules, adverse weather, and even shipwreck could land large numbers of travellers on unexpected shores. Another incident recorded by Lucian reveals the profits of piracy, or the rewards gained by those who claim to be the legitimate authority. In some instances, provincial revenues were delivered to Rome via the main sea lanes. Annual tribute payments from a Roman-controlled kingdom in the Crimea were sent via the Black Sea to Bithynia in Asia Minor, and then conveyed via the Aegean to Rome. Lucian found passage aboard one of these vessels as it returned from Rome, sailing via western Greece back to its home port in Asia Minor. On board he met ambassadors from the client king Eupator, heading back to their kingdom to collect the annual tribute due to Rome. From his island base, the false Nero could prey upon seaborne traffic, and whatever fortune might deliver, into his clutches. The Neo-Nero relied on maritime mishaps to swell his rebel movement. The continual passage of sailors, merchants, slaves, captives, and military personnel gave the apparent emperor in exile abundant opportunities to intercept and recruit a significant following from his clandestine island base. The Roman authorities were slow to learn about the threat. News of the popular phony Nero uprising only reached the Greek cities when a centurion named Sisenna managed to escape the island. Sisenna had been travelling to Rome on a diplomatic assignment. He was carrying symbolic tokens of friendship from the Syrian legions to the Praetorian Guard. But the civilian ship on which he travelled was intercepted by pirates, and to his astonishment, Sisenna was brought before a brigand chief claiming to be the true emperor, the Emperor Nero in exile. The pretender realized that if he acquired the imperial tokens, he could convince the Syrian legions that he held their authority as commander of the Praetorian Guard. So the false Nero tried every ruse to convince the centurion of his authenticity and win him over to the rebel cause. Tacitus reports. The false Nero found a centurion named Sisenna, who was the bearer of the clasped right hands, the emblems of alliance, from the army in Syria to the Praetorian Guard. He tried to persuade him with various methods, but Sisenna, fearing violence, secretly escaped the island with all haste. Thus the alarm spread far and wide. The great name of Nero attracted many who longed for revolution and hated the existing state of affairs. Tacitus, Histories. However, before the uprising could further increase or involve a major population centre, the matter was dealt with by a chance occurrence. In Rome, the newly installed Emperor Galba appointed Calpurnius Asprenas as the next governor of the territories of Galatia and Pamphylia in Asia Minor. To guarantee his authority, Asprenas was given an escort of 2 triremes from the Italian fleet of Misenum. These were large war galleys, each with a crew of 200 oarsmen and an onboard unit of well-armed marines. The pirate island of Kythnos was on a much-visited route for military and political personnel. The warships landed by chance on the island. They knew nothing about the rebel base or expected any interference in their mission. Tacitus explains. Galba had entrusted the government of Galatia and Pamphylia to Calpurnius Asprenas. An escort of 2 triremes from the fleet of Misenum were given to him, and with these warships he happened to land on the island of Kythnos. Tacitus. Histories. The false Nero quickly realized that the support of 2 warships from the Italian fleet would allow him to escalate his insurrection. With triremes, he could transfer his island operations to one of the provincial capitals. He could then appear in Antioch or Alexandria. He would present himself as the fugitive Emperor Nero, abandoned by his Praetorian Guard, but defended by a few loyal units in the imperial fleet. Unaware of the true mission being undertaken by the escort vessels, spokesmen from the pretender approached the 2 triremes. They requested an immediate onshore audience with the captains and command staff. Once ashore, they instructed the suddenly bewildered officers to be ready to receive their true commander-in-chief, the supreme office-holder of the Roman state, descendant of the divine Augustus, the Emperor Nero. In his ultimate deceptive gamble, the man claiming these titles appeared and delivered his best possible performance. He begged his loyal soldiers to take pity on his current condition, endorse him, and restore him to power. Tacitus explains. When the ships reached Kythnos, there were men at hand who issued an invitation to the ship's captains in the name of Nero. The pretender himself arrived, assuming a studied appearance of sorrow. He appealed to the loyalty of his former soldiers and urged them to land him in Egypt or Syria. Tacitus. Histories. There was a danger that ordinary soldiers and sailors might find the performance display convincing, especially since military personnel were encouraged to venerate statues and images of the emperor. Luckily, they decided to report back to Asprenas. Tacitus explains. The captains, perhaps due to indecision, were intending to deceive the pretender, declared that they must address their soldiers. They would return when the minds of all had been decided. Tacitus. Histories. Returning to their ships, they reported the matter straight to Asprenas, the loyal supporter and deputy of Galba. Tacitus suggests that the captains may themselves have been half convinced by the acting. But Asprenas did not directly expose himself to the performance. His orders were immediate and precise. Asprenas ordered the triremes into action. Before doubt or misguided hopes might spread the rumour and provoke a mutiny. Tacitus explains. Everything was faithfully reported to Asprenas, and on his orders the ship of the Pretender was boarded. Whoever the man was, he was killed. The body, remarkable for the savage appearance of the eyes and hair, was taken to Asia Minor, and from there to Rome. Tacitus, Histories, Book 2, Passage 9. So ended the career of the pirate Prince Nero. He had been convincing enough to engender a popular uprising, but the adherence to his cause and proclamation by dissident soldiers had not proven sufficient for him to seize imperial power. But what of other false Neros? What tactics did they use to fulfill the promise given by various plans and prophecies? How did they meet the misguided hopes of the subject masses? Perhaps a rival empire would support the restoration of a substitute Nero. The next talk considers Nero, the Parthian impersonator. Thank you for your attention.